It's official. We are going to the Dolomites this summer for the first time, and I figured this is a better opportunity than any to go ahead and start recording this process from the beginning stages to share how we plan our trip. Welcome to my channel. My name is Nancy, and I figured this was a better opportunity than ever to begin taking you all through this process of how we plan our trips. Annually, me and my husband will typically do trips either domestically, internationally. We're based in the US, and why not take people through the process that we go through when we want to plan a new trip, especially something that we haven't done before, which is very standard for us each year, and share that whole entire process. Because I'm sure you've seen a multitude of videos across all the platforms, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, and they highlight different things regarding the Dolomites. And you're probably being bombarded with all that information. You're like, I would love to go on one of those trips, but I don't know where to start. So follow us, go through this difficult process with us, and I'm more than happy to share with you what works, what doesn't work, what was probably the most frustrating part of the process from the beginning through the entire process, as well as the actual trip and then following up after the trip. You're probably curious as to why we decided to do the Dolomites, and the easiest reason was because our family was already planning a trip with everyone this summer. And rather than creating a whole different itinerary in another location, having to buy a separate plane ticket, we said, we're already here. We're going to be in Italy. We'll just extend our trip and choose something that we personally want to do, something that we've always wanted to do, and we'll plan from there. Now, as I've mentioned, I am not very familiar with this. I haven't done this type of hiking trip in this area. So I obviously started to do an extensive research on my own, and whether it was watching specific videos, coming across different blogs, other sort of resources, and trying to piece together what will make sense to us and how we wanted to plan this trip. So, one of the first things I had to determine was, where are we going specifically in the Dolomites? What route are we taking? How long are we going to want to hike? How many days do we have to spend there? So, you kind of have to think of all these additional factors when planning this trip. First things first, one of the pieces that I started looking at is the entirety of the Dolomites, the types of trails that are available, what we would rather pick. The Altavia 1, or as they call it, the AV1, is the more common route that you've probably come across in videos and in resources, as most people would choose that one. That is oftentimes the one that pops up on everyone's list as the most popular one. But the thing is, it's such an extensive area that that's not the only trail that's available. So, us being the weirdos that we are and wanting to go on a different path than everybody else, we decided to pick the Altavia 2 just on a whim. So, that could either bite me in the butt later on, but we said, why not? Let's go ahead and try this. The one thing that I've encountered recently as I've been doing this research is, I know that Altavia 2 is not as well traveled as the 1, but is still as beautiful because obviously you're going to be in this amazing area of northern Italy. So some of the factors we took into account are, I know that this route is a lot longer, but we're not going to be doing the entire route. We figured we'll give ourselves maybe a week, about 6 days, 7 days, or something like that, to complete a section of the hike from a specific starting point that makes sense for us. So now that we've decided we're doing the Altavia 2, I had to figure out what section we were starting in, where we were going to end, and how much hiking I wanted to do per day. As you can imagine, I definitely became overwhelmed because there's so much to this type of trip that we have not planned before. So I needed a little bit of help on my end. There are resources out there and there are companies that actually can plan this type of trip for you, but oftentimes I feel like I've seen a couple videos and reviews where they might miss the mark and they will choose the easiest thing for you. But if you wanted to make it more challenging, if you wanted to see specific areas, if you didn't want to have to hop into every single town, it's probably going to be best to try to plan it yourself. It does require a little bit more thinking on your end and maybe a little stressful, but I figured why not? Let's go ahead and do this. So I ended up finding a resource. There's a website called the Hiking Club, and it was created by a few people that had more extensive knowledge of a lot of those hut to hut hikes that exist in Europe, where you can actually pay to access a specific route. And in this case, I wanted to do the Altavia 2, so they actually had the option to select the Altavia 2 resources, and I can build out my personalized itinerary that works for us. And it allows me to map out the route, how long I wanted to hike, as I'd mentioned, how many days we were going to be hiking, and then I can even, like I said, determine the total amount of distance I wanted to travel per day. So then I can make it easy, I can make it hard. I don't have to travel too much if I wanted to. But then you ultimately had to decide a starting point. And like I said, I've looked at a couple of different things, and it is overwhelming if you don't know where to start. So this actually provided me with the resources where I could plan our trip. After purchasing our specific plan from the hiking club, it allowed me to start planning out the route. In their resources, I was able to start picking a point and an endpoint of our route along the Altavia 2. As I mentioned, we're not doing the whole entire trail because it is 100 miles in total, and we don't have more than a week to plan this. So I have to be really strategic about what we're doing. And we're leaving from Rome, and the goal is to get to a good point with on the trail that will allow us to begin our hike and then continue onwards to a specific point. At this point, which was about January, February, we decided to start from San Pellegrino and continue northbound towards Bressanone, which is actually the starting point for the one of the points for the Altavia 2. And typically people will go southbound, but I didn't find anything in particular that states whether you have to go a specific route. So we might just be going against the grain in its entirety and going the opposite direction of what people usually do. So we figured, why not? And the reason also was because we wanted to go somewhere else afterwards. We didn't want to fly out of the same area, so we weren't going to go back to Rome to fly home. We were going to choose a different location in a place that we haven't visited before, so then we can have time to explore there and then fly back home. We agreed that this is the route that we wanted to take, and this is how many days we wanted to plan the trip, kind of space it out reasonably, where the days could have about maybe 7 miles to, there's one day that has 10 miles. But ultimately, once we've kind of mapped out the entire route, one of the first things we ended up booking was our flight. And I will tell you, as we've gone through the process, there are certain things that we've kind of had to be flexible about. And that's one of the main pieces when it comes to planning these types of trips, that not everything's always going to be planned to a T. You might have to pivot and change depending on what makes the most sense, what funds you have available, and yeah, just a lot of those things. And in the case of our flight, we originally, as I mentioned, we're going to be flying into Rome. We're going to fly out a different place. Originally, we wanted to go to Innsbruck because it's not too far from Bressanone, and it's a really cool like mountain town in Austria. And it's like, oh, we should go visit that. But ended up moving away from that because after looking at flights and trying to come back home, there's not really that many flights leaving from Innsbruck. It's a lot smaller of a town, and a lot of the flights ended up switching us from leaving from Munich, which then required us to have another train that's not a short train ride to Munich to fly out. And we're like, well, we've already been in Munich. We really want to do that. Or we also don't want to have to wake up extra early to leave at a specific time just to ensure that we get to our flight. So we decided instead of Innsbruck, we're going to go to Vienna. So we booked a flight out of Vienna, and that worked a little bit better. So that's where we started from. We ended up finding a reasonably priced flight, and this is where you also kind of get flexible on the days as well, because we're going to Europe in the summer, which is a very popular time, kind of on the tail end of summer, but still very busy. And you kind of have to take into account that the flight tickets are going to be pretty expensive. So we wanted to make sure that we were paying a reasonable amount of money for those flight tickets. So yeah, we ended up finding a flight that leaves, goes to Rome, and then we come back from Vienna. Now, on to the next portion of this trip planning. We had to start looking into booking the huts, the accommodations that are along the trail. So this is where a lot of the resources from the hiking club did come in handy. They actually provided us with links to specific websites for each of the huts. And it's something that we've learned while we were looking into all these details. If you're from the US, I know typically when you do multi-day hiking trips and you go hiking from place to point to point, oftentimes you're going to be doing a lot of camping, and it's wild camping where you set up a tent, carry a lot of your gear. And in places like Europe and in South America, it's very common to encounter these types of hut to hut hikes where you can actually book an accommodation that is along the trail or within a town nearby. And so it is a little bit more comfortable for certain people that maybe don't want to go roughing it in the wild. Um, and also, in this case, with the Dolomites and in certain other areas of Europe, wild hiking is not, wild camping is not common or allowed. So you do have to book huts when you're going on these trips. And that obviously put little bit more pressure on me as well, because I obviously started a little bit late when it came to booking these accommodations. And they typically do say like 6 months to a year in advance, depending on where you're going, how popular the area is, because things can book up pretty quickly. And if you want a specific type of room, as the huts will oftentimes provide you with either the option for a private double room, which is something that we were looking for in particular, or there's dormitory style rooms where you just have a bed. So it's kind of similar like a hostel where, hey, you have a place to sleep, but it's going to be in a shared space with a couple of other people that are also hiking. So a lot of strangers, if that's something that you're okay with. And then the other piece that was also unique to this hike is that they offer half boarding, which is new to me. I have never gotten to experience this. And it also provides me with a sense of relief where I don't have to carry as much gear as I thought I was going to have to carry, because half boarding means I will have my accommodations, so whatever bed I've selected. Some of these huts will have amenities such as showers, but it also provides you with a hot meal. So, like, you'll be able to check in, you'll get a nice dinner. So, that means requiring you to carry less food. And that's always a plus in my book. Let's start going through a couple of the huts that we booked for our specific route. So we ultimately ended up with about what 6 to 7 days where we're going to be stopping at different points. I was able to determine like how much we wanted to hike per day, how many days we wanted to stay at each hut, depending on what made the most sense for us, and not, we didn't really want to rush through it. We wanted to enjoy it as much as possible. So, booking the huts, they all vary from place to place. They're not all created equally, so that is something to consider. And I figured I'd go ahead and highlight the ones that we specifically booked, so then you can determine what you need to be prepared for when you start this whole entire process. Hut number one is Fidaya. So that is going to be the first hut we encountered while on the trail once we leave, I guess, the starting point that we have set. And Fidaya, we're only going to be staying there for one night. This one has a website, is pretty easy to book. We were able to submit a lot of that information via the website. I sent in the request, and it was 90 euros per person. We did end up snagging a double private room for half board. So that price makes sense for, food and boarding. And with a lot of these huts, you will also be required to put down a deposit to ensure that you have your reservation, and then the remainder of the amount will be paid upon arriving at the hut. So for this particular one, once I submitted my request for booking, they sent me a link which I was able to click on. It allowed me to put my card information in, and then I was able to submit payment. And then I received a receipt via email that stated that I paid the deposit. So that one was very simple, easy. Number two, I might be mispronouncing this, but I think it's called Pishadu, which is the second hut that we looked into, and that is after Fidaya. It's a pretty decent hike and trek to this next location. So one of the things we did consider is that we'll book 2 nights here. That way we can do a little bit of an active rest, do some day hiking while we're staying in this one area for 2 nights, and we're not killing ourselves because the goal is just to enjoy everything that we're doing and not kill ourselves. We're not here to like win an award for the hike that we're doing. So we're going to be staying there 2 nights. This one also was fairly easy to book. They have a nice website that allows you to see a couple of the resources, some video, some pictures, and then you can select the dates, type of room, how many people, and they had a really easy online booking system. This one ended up being about 85 per person per night. And so in total, I ended up having to put down 120 euros initially because I think that obviously breaks down to about 30 euros per person per night because you have to do the deposit for every night that you stay in the hut. So I've already paid that amount towards this one. I was able to pay via card as well for this specific hut. Our third location, Puez, was probably the one that gave me the most stress, headache, all the above, because if you do get a chance to check out their website as well as their Instagram page, you can see that it's a very popular location. It sits at a very high elevation and pretty remote based on where you are in that specific section of the Altavia 2 trail. And so it's very, it's much a necessity in my case to make sure that we book this spot. This was actually the last hut I ended up securing because everything else went fairly easy. But since I started the booking process in February, there was no one really present there because it's off season and they don't start doing a lot of the accommodations until June. And so I reached out to them after I had gone to the website. They do allow you to select the date, how many people, to see if there's a type of accommodation available to you. And on the day that we needed, it wasn't available, which obviously that led me into a little bit of panic. So instead of me saying that, oh, there's no way, I figured, hey, why not? I need to go ahead and email them to see if it's still possible. The system might be wrong, or you might just have better luck reaching out to them directly just to make sure that you've gone through like all possible options. So I emailed them and I initially got a automated response that stated they were out for the season. And so I followed up with them again like a week later, and I think maybe a third time. Eventually, I did hear back from them, which, bless, I was so happy that I did acquire that, even after looking at potential alternatives in the meantime. But this particular one, I was very happy to receive a response. They told me the price, which honestly, I don't even remember if I wrote it down initially, how much it's going to cost, but it's around the same price as the other ones where you're paying about like 80, 90 euros per person. We're going to be staying here one night as well, and they required an 80 euro deposit. This particular one, you actually had to wire transfer, so there's no way to input a card to make the payment. I actually had to go through like my bank, put in the wire transfer information that they gave me. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I get a little skeptical and unsure if I entered the information correctly. But once I started typing it in, it looked like it started to match. I made sure that I screenshotted all the details, the confirmation, and I sent it directly back to them via email to confirm, like, hey, this is my wire transfer. This is for this specific date for us, how many people, what type of boarding. We also only were able to acquire a dormitory style boarding, but in that case, like I told you, um, I was fine with it. It is what it is. Like, we're not going to get everything that we want to get, but I'd rather be able to have this particular spot on our hike. The next location is Campanelm, and this is not the only option available within this specific section of the trail. It's just the one that we ended up selecting because of the type of accommodations that they had available. Like I'd mentioned, we prefer to have the double room, private room, rather than the dormitory style room. The one that is actually closest to the trail is called Schlitterhütte, and when I reached out to them via email, they only had dormitory style rooms. So I was like, let me see if there's something that's close by. And thankfully, in this area, there's not just one option. So Gampen Alm actually came up on my radar as well. It is about 30 minutes down from the main part of the trail, but it's not too far. I feel like 30 minutes is not too bad of like a detour just to get another accommodation. It looks like from the website that this particular hut does service a lot of families and people that are doing a lot of day trips from town. So I'm pretty excited to stay here. We did acquire, I mentioned, a double room for one night at this particular place. It was 84 euros per person, and I had to put down a 50 euro deposit. This one also I had to submit via wire transfer, and they were pretty quick to respond. I'd say within 24 to 48 hours when you email them between like responses. And I did the exact same thing I did with Puez, where I screenshotted the wire transfer confirmation, sent them the information, reiterated my name as well as like the dates that I needed when I'm checking in, checking out, what type of accommodations we were getting. So that way they have it all on record. It's all on my email. So that way it'll be easy for me to save and present it to them when we arrive. Last but not least, our final hut is going to be Plaza. And that is going to be at a point like it's gonna put us really close to Bressanone. And this one actually ended up being the most expensive hut we booked. Um, Very easy system online. I was actually able to input everything, select the option, what type of room, what date, and I was able to pay everything online. But as I'd mentioned, it was pricey. We ended up getting a private double room. In this case, they called it the romantic room, and it was 200 euros total. So pretty pricey for one night for the half board. But you know what? It is what it is. Why not get to experience it? I also think it's because of the location. The plaza is pretty close to like where that starting point is, Barcelona. It is accessible by a lot of different towns, and they have a lot of like gondolas and lifts that reach that area. So I can only imagine how busy it's going to be in the summer. So that was our last hut. We were able to secure that, and I went ahead and put the deposit. I don't know if I stated it was 60 euros to pay them for the deposit. Quick shout out though, I do want to mention one of the huts that I ended up reaching out when I was unsure of whether or not I was going to get Puez. Uh, Madalga Ames, Madalga Ams, sorry, Madalgasam. I cannot pronounce the word, but that one's actually located in a very um, close proximity to Schutterhütte and Gampenalm. Um, if you're curious about it, it is a very remote hut that is available to book as well. They are very, very, very more rustic than the rest of them. There's not really a website that I was able to find, as well as like an email address that I could reach out to them. I actually called the number directly. It was answered by a lady. She seemed really sweet. And for you to book them, it was just like word of mouth. She just took my name and the number of people, so that's something to consider. They don't actually take the deposit, but she just like secures you by like, oh, so and so is gonna be here. And it's definitely more rustic than the rest of them. Like, I think one thing to consider, and I've looked this up already, is that that one doesn't have showers. So if you wanted specific amenities like that, that is something to consider if that is a hut that you are able to book or is the only one that's available to book. Keep that in mind. After finalizing this portion of the trip, determining where we're starting, and having all the huts in line, we needed to figure out how we were getting from Rome to the starting point of the trail and the route that we were going to take. I ultimately found out that this was a little bit trickier than I initially expected, obviously, because, I do research in bits and pieces. And the starting point that we had originally set as San Pellegrino required us to take multiple trains, multiple buses to reach that point, and probably would have taken at least 10 hours. So the full day of just hopping from one mode of transportation, transferring to another, hopefully making specific layovers. And ultimately, I realized that it probably wasn't an ideal situation. We were going to be tired. We were going to have to drop off specific items, equipment with family members that we're going to take back home with them, and just carrying our packs that have all of our gear that we needed for the specific hike. And I ended up finding out that there's a direct bus line from Venice that services the Dolomites. And as you know, like the further north you go, there's going to be a multitude of resources that allow you to reach those areas. But the bus only runs once a day, early in the morning. So obviously, if we were leaving early in the morning from Rome, we would miss that bus. And instead of just taking the one bus, we'd have to take multiple buses. And I don't know about you, but there's a specific point when you're like, do you want to make this more difficult for yourself, or do you just want to like be flexible in that situation? So obviously, it changed the route, the starting day for us a little bit, but I think it's going to be more manageable and makes more sense, at least as far as, like I said, we're just trying to enjoy this trip. So from Rome, we're actually going to leave and head directly to Venice. Ideally, we're going to take a fast train. It's going to get us into the city maybe mid afternoon, which will be a reasonable amount of time. We'll be able to check in. I'm going to be looking for an accommodation that's going to situate us close to the bus and the train station. And then that way we can, have dinner, leisurely dinner, walk around, get some sleep, and then wake up early the next morning and get on that direct bus that takes us to a new starting point on the Alta 2 trail. So that we actually are cutting down some of that initial first day hike. I originally had a lot of hiking that first day, but since we were going to be arriving around lunchtime, I ended up choosing a new point, which is Maga Ciapella, and that's one of the stops on the bus. So it made the most sense, and it puts us as close to the first booked hut that we have on our trip itinerary. So it's a little bit shorter of a hike, but I think it's going to get us acclimated pretty quickly because there's still a big elevation gain, even though there's less hiking. But you kind of have to work with what you got. So that was the next pivot that we've made. I've already booked the bus. So I was able to find the website for a local bus company and bought the tickets. So I do have that already set with our reservations. I think it was about 14 euros. It really wasn't too expensive. 14, 20 euros. I'd have to go back and check. But yeah, we have the tickets already for the bus that will leave early in the morning in Venice and take us to our starting point. Let me know what you thought about this video. I'd love to hear from you if it was something that was helpful, if it covered a couple of the pieces that you were curious about when it comes to planning this trip, as well as maybe anything that I might not have covered and maybe haven't covered yet. I don't think I've gotten there yet. But yeah, I think this is going to be quite the journey in the next couple of months, and I'm happy to share my experience. So until then, peace.